Hey everybody, Johnny the Queer POTUS here. I'm currently working on a much longer essay about immigration in the Reagan era, but I thought I'd buy myself some time by doing a fun one. And to show you how devoted I am to this being a fun episode, I'm going to crack open a beer for the duration of the video. Cheers. So today, we're going to take a look at whether President Barack Obama, or any former president who's already served 2 terms for that matter, could ever become president of the United States again.
Can you run? Can you run?
The 22nd Amendment to the United States Constitution puts an explicit cap on the number of times a person can run for president. No person shall be elected to the office of president more than twice, and no person who has held the office of president or acted as president for more than 2 years of a term to which some other person was elected president shall be elected to the office of president more than once. That's kind of complicated language, but essentially what it says is you can only win twice and then you're done. That's why presidents like Barack Obama or Ronald Reagan, who had high approval ratings by the end of their second terms, didn't just keep that sweet train a-rolling. But there are actually more ways to become the president than just to be elected. In the 248-year history of this country, 8 vice presidents, John Tyler, Millard Fillmore, Andrew Johnson, Chester Arthur, Theodore Roosevelt, Calvin Coolidge, Harry Truman, and Lyndon Baines Johnson, all assumed the presidency after the sudden deaths of their predecessors. Gerald Ford has the distinction of being the only president to take over after the previous president resigned. Ford himself was only a Michigan congressman when Richard Nixon's VP, Spiro Agnew, resigned in disgrace. Ford was appointed vice president less than a year before Nixon himself resigned. Thus, in the 1972 congressional election in Michigan, when 118,000 people of Michigan's small 5th district voted for Congressman Ford, they unknowingly elected the 38th president of the United States. Oh, that's good. Ever since the 22nd Amendment was ratified in 1951, presidents have been limited to running for 2 terms. It was all thanks to our 32nd and longest-serving president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. In 1940, on the eve of the Second World War, and in the depths of the Great Depression, Roosevelt broke with a precedent in presidential politics which went all the way back to George Washington. He ran for a 3rd term.
I will, with God's help, continue to serve with the best of my ability and with the fullness of my strength.
Sure, George Washington retired after his 2nd term, and he urged all of his future successors to do the same, but the tradition was just that, a tradition. It wasn't the law. FDR wasn't even the first one to try and break the tradition. Former 2-term President Ulysses Grant was the frontrunner in the 1880 Republican primary, but lost the nomination to a dark horse congressman from Ohio named James Garfield. Teddy Roosevelt ran for a 3rd term in 1912 as a third-party candidate, but lost to New Jersey Governor Woodrow Wilson. Only Teddy's second cousin, Franklin, however, actually successfully broke Washington's spell, winning a 3rd term in 1940 and a 4th term in 1944. Roosevelt died only 3 months after his inauguration in 1945, placing Vice President Harry Truman in office. Naturally, after 12 years of Roosevelt's rule, that old discussion about term limits started up again. It was a question that bugged many of the founders of the country. If some termination to the services of the Chief Magistrate be not fixed by the Constitution, or supplied by practice, his office, nominally for years, will in fact become for life, and history shows how easily that degenerates into an inheritance. In Roosevelt's case, Jefferson's warning proved literally true. He actually did end up being president for life, and in the aftermath of his death, Republicans galvanized behind a constitutional amendment, limiting all future presidents to 2 terms. On February 24th, 1951, they got their wish with the ratification of the 22nd Amendment. And so, on January 20th, 2017, when President Barack Obama handed the reins of power over to President-elect Donald Trump, he gave up power for life, never to return to the White House again. Right? Wrong. The language of the 22nd Amendment is famously contradictory. The amendment prevents Obama from running again as president, but it says nothing about running for vice president. Here, let's take a look again. No person shall be elected to the office of president more than twice. Not vice president. And the line that follows is oddly specific to the circumstances of Roosevelt's case. No person who has held the office of president or acted as president for more than 2 years of a term to which some other person was elected president shall be elected to the office of president more than once. In other words, if you were vice president and the president died and you only served less than 2 years of their term, you can run for president 2 more times. But if that same president had died 2 days shy of their 2-year anniversary, well, my friend, you can only run once, and then you're done. So if you're, say, Gerald Ford, and you took over after Nixon resigned in 1974, by the time you finished Nixon's term, you'd have been in office for just over 2 years. You're free to run against Jimmy Carter in 1976, but if you're looking for that elusive third term in 1980, sorry, you're out. On the other hand, if you're, say, Lyndon Johnson, and you've only served a year and a few months of Kennedy's term, you're not just eligible for the election of 1964, you're also eligible for 1968. President Johnson did not take advantage of this, however.
I shall not seek, and I will not accept the nomination of my party for another term as your president.
So as of the passage of the 22nd Amendment, the longest a single person can serve as president is 9 years, 364 days, not accounting for leap years. Even so, there is still a way Barack Obama could serve a third term. However unlikely the following scenario is, and for the record, I would call this a very unlikely scenario. Let's say former Vice President Joe Biden wins the 2020 Democratic nomination. Early polling shows his numbers against President Trump are too close for comfort. In an unprecedented move, the former vice president electrifies the country by nominating former President Barack Obama as his running mate. The addition of the former president to Biden's ticket secures his victory over incumbent President Trump, and Barack Obama becomes the 49th vice president of the United States. On January 20th, 2021, Biden takes the oath of office.
I, Joseph R. Biden Jr., do solemnly swear.
As he steps to the podium to deliver his inaugural address, Biden makes a shocking announcement. My fellow Americans, I hereby resign the presidency effective immediately. Vice President Obama promptly steps up to the podium and takes the oath of office, becoming America's 47th president.
So help me God.
Congratulations, Mr. President.
By the wording of the 22nd Amendment, that'd be technically legit. New President Obama could then pursue changing the Constitution. Fellow Americans, I promise to you that in my first 100 days, I will work to repeal the 22nd Amendment to the Constitution. This is just we're just goofing around here. Besides, the 12th Amendment says that no person constitutionally ineligible to the office of president shall be eligible to that of vice president. But again, the 22nd Amendment doesn't make Barack Obama ineligible to be president. It only makes him ineligible to be elected president. Nevertheless, it's a highly far-fetched scenario. However, I can't say these kinds of electoral tricks haven't happened before. When Vladimir Putin reached the end of his second term as president of Russia in 2008, the Constitution prevented him from serving 3 consecutive terms. So, his prime minister, Dmitry Medvedev, agreed to run instead of Putin, and when Medvedev won, Putin was appointed prime minister. When the 2012 election rolled around, Medvedev stepped aside and allowed Putin to run for a third non-consecutive term. Putin won the election and quickly saw through changes to the Constitution, which forever eliminated term limits on the Russian president. It's a post Putin holds to this day. Putin's move earned a great deal of internal as well as international condemnation, and deriders came to call this move rokirovka, Russian for a chess move known as castling. And castling is basically this. If you move your king 2 spaces in any direction, the rook can jump over the king, and that's considered one move. So in a single move, a less important piece is sent out to face the public, while the real power is hidden in the background. Could castling ever happen in the United States? Well, our government is set up a little differently in the US, but in theory, it could. Let's say future President Mike Pence. Future President Mike Pence takes the oath of office on January 20th, 2025, with his vice president, Donald Trump. Pence could resign on day 1, making Trump president again. Pence could be the 46th president for a day in 2025 before instantly resigning, making Trump the 47th president. They could do it again in 2029, this time as the 48th and 49th presidents. The two of them could repeat this process 2 times before Pence would no longer be eligible to run for president, at which point Trump would need someone else to be his rook. Any future president could attempt this trick. Although I think if this kind of presidential musical chairs was going on in full public view and there was no strong opposition standing in the way, chances are a president with that kind of power would have the leverage to just repeal the 22nd Amendment. You might be surprised to find out which president didn't support term limits. During his exit interview at the Oval Office on January 17, 1989, outgoing President Ronald Reagan was asked what issues he might like to continue working on during his post-presidency.
There are things that, for example, the 22nd Amendment that was passed by our own party here as revenge for Roosevelt, that says that 2 terms is the limit for a president. This is the only office that's elected by all the people. I think that is an infringement on the democratic rights of the people. And now that I'm out of office so that they can't accuse me of wanting to do it for myself, I'm going to see if I can't mobilize the people to demand the repeal of that amendment. It is an invasion of their democratic rights to vote for whoever they want to vote for and for however long.
Ultimately, there are no limits to what someone can do in this country under our Constitution, since, as Abraham Lincoln once pointed out, a mode was provided for amending it. Changing the Constitution can often be a long and arduous process, which requires a great deal of support. But what do we know about the kind of country we'll be living in years from now? The 13th Amendment banning slavery was passed quickly in a time of national emergency. We may little imagine the challenges our country will face in the future and what our nation will feel compelled to do about them. As long as the American people keep living, arguing, thinking, fighting, and moving, nothing is ever permanently unconstitutional. Thank you all for listening in today. This has just been a quick little goofy fun video that I did. I want to thank my friends at 21st Amendment Brewery. Also want to remind you to like, subscribe, and if you can, donate to my Patreon. It really helps me out. I really appreciate it. I'm working really hard on the next video. It's about Ronald Reagan and immigration in the 1980s. It's about El Salvador, Nicaragua, Guatemala. Please stay tuned, and I'll see you again in the future. The 22nd Amendment has one of the most specific provisions I've ever seen. After the first 2 sentences of the amendment, which I covered in this video, there's a third sentence, a kind of caveat, which states, "But this article shall not apply to any person holding the office of president when this article was proposed by the Congress, and shall not prevent any person who may be holding the office of president or acting as president during the term within which this article becomes operative from holding the office of president or acting as president during the remainder of such term." The so-called person who may be holding the office when the article becomes operative could only refer to one man, the guy who was holding the office at the time, President Harry Truman. The line is basically a fancy way of saying, except Harry Truman. And I think it's the only example in the entire Constitution of a single individual being called out in this way. Sure, having their names prominently displayed on the parchment of the Constitution for all time is an enviable claim to fame for the founders. But how many Americans can honestly say a whole amendment was constructed to apply specifically to them? Only this guy. And so, as long as there is a United States of America, Harry Truman will forever be photobombing the Constitution.